Hi, I'm attorney Gregory Dell, and I'm here with attorney Jessup. And today we're going to talk about the standard, and specifically we're going to talk about how to apply for long-term disability benefits with the standard. And based upon our years of experience of handling tons of claims on behalf of claimants against the standard, providing tips and guidance for how to get approved and kind of what to expect as well. Now, Steve, you know we've helped hundreds of people to apply, and that's a service that we offer, and we encourage you to contact us for a free consultation in which we'll review your disability policy and let you know all of your options. But today in this video, we want to share some of our experience and things that you should be aware of that could help you to get approved and obviously avoid a potential denial. So I want to get into first, obviously someone calls you, you're going to say, send us the policy. And why is it so important for not only us, but for the claimant to understand what's in that policy moving forward?
Well, policy language is going to dictate everything that's going to happen with your claim. And interesting too, Standard is one of the few insurance companies that does private individual disability policies as well as ERISA group disability policies. So it's good to know what you're working with. The laws are going to be different. But we're going to assume that most people call us, it has to do with an employer-provided group policy, and that policy language is very, very important to a claim because Standard does write some of the most restrictive policies in the market, to tell you the truth. So, they'll pigeonhole, depending on your policy language, a vast majority of medical conditions to sometimes as low as 12 months of maximum benefit payouts or 24 months. So it's really good to know what exactly your coverage is.
So let's talk about some of those things, because it's supposed to be long-term disability. And Standard is a very savvy company. I mean, they're smart, but they're an insurance company. They're in business to make money and sell policies. We've seen the evolution of their policies over the last 15, 20 years, and it seems like they're trying to get to the point where we only intend to pay certain claims for a period greater than 12 or 24 months. So what are some examples of these limitations that someone who Standard agrees is disabled but limits them to 12 or 24 months?
Well, I think the biggest one that's in almost every disability policy, 99% of the policies we'll see, is a mental health limitation. That was the first of the big ones. Mental health and substance abuse. We're usually limited to 24 months of benefits. That's very standard in the industry. And then slowly, they started to add a lot more medical conditions, to that list. I recently pulled the Standard policy for one of my clients, and the limitations include a musculoskeletal connective tissue disorder, which includes things like fibromyalgia, myofascial pain, arthritis, carpal tunnel, chronic fatigue syndrome. So any of those, whether it be from Epstein-Barr, post-viral syndrome, a lot of these common things we're starting to see, and even chemical and environmental sensitivities, sick building syndrome, mold toxicology. So there's a plethora of conditions that we see that lead to disability that they're saying, essentially in their policy provisions, like, yeah, we understand that you're disabled, but we only have to pay you for X amount of time. There are some, restrictions or limitations that would take your condition outside of that. That's why it's important to know what your policy covers and then what your doctors are representing from a medical standpoint to make sure it's there. If you go to your doctor and just say, hey, my back's been hurting me, and the doctor writes, myofascial pain, chronic pain in the back, you could be very well limited to anywhere from 12 to 24 months of a total payout, whereas if you had EMG or nerve conduction study that evidenced a radiculopathy, you could get yourself around that restriction. So knowing what you're walking yourself into is really important, because you're right, a lot of people think, hey, this is long term, it's supposed to cover me till I'm age 65 or my Social Security normal retirement age. But in a lot of ways, it's just a long short-term policy, if you will. So it's really important to know what they are going to take a look at and how it could affect you going forward.
So a lot of claimants call, and the first thing you ask them when they're applying is, do you have doctor support? Mm-hmm. And usually they'll say, yes, I have doctor support. But explain why it's so much more than just, my doctor says that I'm disabled.
Well, a lot of times we'll see, people will contact us after their claim's been denied, and they'll say, oh, here's some medical information we'll send over. And it's like on a prescription pad where the doctor says out of work until a date. Right. And then when you look at the medical records, there's really no indication of what the person's problems are. if things are getting worse, how it's impacting work. So the doctors may say, yeah, they're willing to help you out, but they're not necessarily documenting your file, which is common. Doctors aren't, documenting a file for the purpose of an insurance company. They're doing it for your treatment. But when there's even an idea there may be a disability claim, it's very important the doctor's documenting properly. And then also when completing forms, is completing those forms properly. So you may have the doctor's support, and the doctor may agree you can't work, but at the end of the day, Standard is going to live and die by what's in your medical records. That's what's going to be the objective evidence to them. Anything outside of that, they take, at a lesser level of evidence, if you will.
So one of the things you said is that doctors aren't documenting for the insurance company, which is absolutely true. They're just documenting to remind themselves of what they did there, the patient's progress, because doctors want to get the patient better, obviously. Completely different than the way Standard, and Standard is really well trained and has their own medical team and nurses and outside consultants, and they take advantage of that fact that the doctors aren't doing this for them. And so any weaknesses or things that are left out, Standard's going to pick out every single one of them and say, we don't see these 5 things in there, when they probably exist, but the doctor didn't put them in there. So one of the valuable things about having us work with a claimant that makes it easier is that the doctors know that these disability insurance companies can be difficult to deal with. So when a claimant goes in and says, hey, I'm working with a lawyer, his name is Steve, and he's been dealing with the Standard and these companies for a while, he suggested the following. It's kind of like an intermediary where, the claimant can explain, look, I need this for my income, I can't work, and I can't afford this to get screwed up, and my lawyer has told me that this is what needs to be there. Would you be willing to cooperate so that these things are, please make sure this is in there. Please complete this attending physician statement in this manner. And that's difficult for a claimant to go in on their own and have that conversation, with a doctor.
A lot of people are kind of shy to have that conversation. They always ask, how do I approach my doctor with this even? Some people are even, whether it be pride or, denial, they don't want to, believe that their time of working is coming to an end because of this condition. So they've never been candid with the doctor. So you're right in the sense that when there's a lawyer involved, it's almost like the patient that can deflect onto the lawyer that my lawyer needs this.
Right.
And anything that we're sitting and asking and consulting with the doctor, it's what our client is saying is problematic, what's going on. We just want to make sure the doctor understands that it needs to be in the records. Some doctors, they have their own way of doing things, but at the end of the day, more often than not, we see that a client's doctors is going to be, willing to be helpful and, complete forms, all that type of stuff.
Another tip, Steve, that I know you tell everybody, and whether you're applying or you're on claim, the claim is only as good as it looks on paper. A lot of claimants go to the doctor, how are you feeling? And they say, I'm okay. Mm-hmm. Meaning you're okay in the sense that if you and I went to the doctor who have nothing wrong, we would say we're okay. They go in and their okay is like a 6 out of 10 on a pain scale, or 6 out of 10 in discomfort that day, because they're used to a 9 out of 10 discomfort. So they're okay in the sense that they're managing their symptoms. Not okay in the sense that I'm okay to go back to work. Yeah. I'm okay where, doc, you've got me to a point where I can live my life, I can still do things, I'm able to get out of bed, I'm not in writhing pain 24/7. But that okay doesn't translate to the ability to return to work 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, waking up every day, being a reliable employee. So the doctor's glad to hear that you think you're okay, but you don't get any points for that. You get annihilated for that by the Standard, because they're going to deny the claim based on that. So I always tell the claimants, you got to go in and make yourself, the only way I say it is like messed up on paper. You have to document everything that's going on, because if it's not there, it didn't happen.
Yeah, and also in a situation where the purpose of treatment is improvement. Doctors are trying to get your symptoms to improve. And like you said, outside the context of work, maybe pain scales are down, all that stuff, but you're not working, you're not doing things that were aggravating it. So even in those situations where there is improvement, a doctor wants to note the improvement, it always has to be in that with the caveat in the context of improvement, because outside of work, with being able to rest more and take breaks as needed, he's able to, the patient's able to handle pain better. So there is going to see improvements in there, but you always, if the doctor wants to have that in the context of what's going on with you not being at work and all that type of stuff. So it's very, very important. And a lot of people, you're right, a lot of people just, some people don't want to admit, how bad they are exactly doing. They say okay, and if okay ends up in a medical record or feeling great, which we've seen plenty of times,
right,
and we've asked the client, like, what's this about? And they're like, I don't even know why that's there. It's really important because, fast forward, if you find yourself in court litigating one of these cases, the only thing a judge is going to look at is the paperwork, is the documentation. So you really are your case is only as strong as what it says on paper.
So, we'll regularly work with the claimant, guide them through this process, and make sure that all of the medical support is dialed in as best as possible. The next thing that's super important for this application, which is unique to the standard, is how they define occupation, because often, even if you have an individual disability policy, you don't get a true own occupation definition of disability. Explain what I'm talking about and why that should be very important to a claimant who's seeking disability for what they believe is their own occupation.
One of the biggest things is this idea of the national economy. So standard will say, whether it be the first 12, 24 months, whatever the case may be, you're disabled if you cannot perform the material duties of your regular occupation. Well, we all know what our jobs are. We know what we do day in, day out. But the way they're going to take a look at it is in this broader concept of how it is performed in the national economy. So not for your employer, not at your specific workplace. And we do see situations where there's a denial of benefits, and the person the disability is preventing them from working. Maybe they're having issues with their boss or at that specific job site. And you'll see a denial saying, well, this is an occupational thing just for this employer. You could do your job in the national economy somewhere else, so you're not disabled. So it's not exactly how you're doing your job, where you're doing your job, for who you're doing your job. It's how it's done throughout the country. And there's books and there's like documents and there's sites that they use, government sponsor one, private ones, to get an idea of occupational duties.
Yeah, and just so we're clear, let's just take someone like an accountant. Most people think the accountant sits behind the desk all day. But what if you're an accountant who's always on the road, always traveling, always doing audits at different customer sites, having to go, you're always up, and it becomes more of like a light duty job because you're not sitting all day, but you got to stand, travel, walk, lift suitcases, do whatever.
Carry the boxes that have all the documentation and paperwork,
And so standard would say to that person, no, that's not how the job's performed in the national economy. It's a sedentary job. You need to be able to sit for 6 hours a day. You don't have to lift more than 10 pounds. We don't care that you're doing this for however your other employer is doing it, or you're an in-house accountant for some company and they have you doing something totally different. So that's not going to fly, but there may be a manner in which we present the occupation differently and not necessarily label you as the accountant, because you may not actually be, if you're not functioning as how they think an accountant does in national economy, then maybe that's not the right job title for you. So that's something we'll work through in the application process, which could totally save a claim denial. And there's so much to talk about here. The last thing is talk about what someone should expect from standard in terms of as a company and their level of experience with their claims people compared to they're not one of the top 5 big companies. They're a smaller unit, and how you view them and the level of preparedness that a claimant's going to need to get approved.
Standard, like I said when we started, they write individual products and they write the group disability. Because of that, you see that in their group disability claims handling, they treat it like they would a private policy. Their employers are very well trained, they're very detail oriented, so you are going to get a stronger level of review. I mean, there's countless times that I see a denial letter from, say, Cigna or Prudential where you just feel like someone had on their desk, they were overwhelmed, and they just said, oh, we'll deny this one, we'll see if they appeal, it'll be the appeals department's problem. Standard, if you get a denial letter, they're always very detailed, they're very long, so you really need to be prepared for all the questions they're going to ask you. They are a very, very thorough insurance company, and when we see claim denials from them, it's not to say we don't win those appeals, but it's much harder to win those appeals because they do a lot of work on the front end of the case as opposed to other companies that really wait to do the real reviews in the appeal process.
So, Steve, we do this video to stress how important it is to be prepared when applying, and whether you're a claimant sitting at home thinking of applying, or you've applied already, we can jump in at any time. It's to your advantage to get us involved as early as possible because we're going to try to put you in the best position to get approved based upon our experience. And the process of working with us is really simple. You can call the 800 number on our video below. You can go to our website, submit a free email consultation. One of the attorneys will immediately contact you. We're going to ask you to send us a copy of your disability policy. We'll set a phone call where we will review the policy, and we're going to let you know right away what we think are your chances of getting approved and whether we can or can't help you. Our clients are located all over the country, so wherever you live is not an issue for us. Whether you speak to Stephen or myself, we hope that we're able to assist you and guide you through this process to get your standard long-term disability benefits approved.